Hi, I'm Norm Smallwood, the co-founder of the RBL Group with Dave Ulrich. The RBL Group is a consulting and development firm. We're experts in developing leaders, increasing the contributions of HR to the business, and building organization capabilities that reinforce firm brand identity and reputation. I'm joined today by Erin Burns, who is our Director of Global Product Development and Client Relations. Erin's been heavily involved in our leadership research and talent product for the last 5+ years. And today, Erin and I are going to talk about talent and frame it around people and positions. So this slide gives you a high-level overview of what we're going to talk about today. I'll set the stage with the overview of what we mean by talent. And then Erin and I are going to go back and forth on various topics. I'll talk about positions. Erin will talk about people. And I'll talk more about people and positions together. And then together with Erin taking the lead, we'll talk about filling the gaps and getting the strategies for the right mix together. Well, this is a pretty simple chart that represents all of the talent in your organization. And you can segment this talent into 4 main buckets. First of all, you've got the C-suite, and the talent issues that they have is sponsoring the talent agenda for the entire organization. But even C-suite members need individual improvement, and usually they get that through coaching. The second bucket is senior business leaders, and their talent issues are usually about succession to the C-suite. We want to figure out who has what it takes to move up. We often run year-long leadership academies that include assessment, development, and action learning projects for senior business leaders and high potentials. Senior business leaders sometimes also need some job assignment rotation if they want to move into a general manager role, for example. The third bucket is high potentials. And their talent issues are about how to either remain a high performer in their current job or move up the ladder to the next opportunity. Job assignments are usually key to success here, especially if the intent is to move up. And as I said with the senior business leaders, we often do leadership academies to develop the talent of your high potentials. And finally, you've got the bucket that represents everybody else, or all employees. And every employee has talent concerns around what we call the 3 C's. Competence, am I developing the right set of skills? Commitment, am I staying engaged and am I psychologically oriented to getting the work done? And contribution, meaning I'm finding meaning in the work that I do. And so the HR leaders who are responsible for talent for all employees need to keep those 3 C's, competence, commitment, and contribution in mind. So the talent pyramid is a pretty useful way to think about the different talent needs at different levels. Well, as I said at the beginning, we're going to talk about talent from a more strategic perspective. And to do that, we need to talk about both positions and people. So let's start with thinking about positions and the importance of positions in terms of driving a talent agenda. Well, before I talk about positions, we're going to back up even one more step and talk about work. So all work does not create similar value. And so if you think back to the talent pyramid I showed, this is basically a framework that looks at all the work that goes on in the organization. And by understanding the type of work, we can understand the different types of positions needed to fill that work. So as you can see here, there's 3 types of work: advantage work, support work, and non-essential work. We want to eliminate the non-essential work, which usually exists because it's supported by a senior leader or has a legacy in the company. So we've always done it this way, so we're always going to keep doing it this way. Talk about advantage work first. It's work that external customers care about. It's usually only about 10 to 15% of all of the work. So if you think about the airline business, before you even think about your own business, what would be the advantage work in the airline business? Who is it that does work that customers really care about in the airline business? Well, most people guess pilots, and pilots are not correct. Pilots are important in the airline industry, but in a minute we'll describe why they're more business essential work than advantage work. In the airline industry, flight attendants and the professionals who design flight routes are the advantage positions. Customers interact with the flight attendants and buy tickets based on ideal routing schedules. Most customers don't buy tickets because they think the pilots are better in one airline than another. So again, pilots would be business essential. So let's make the case for that. Two types of support work: business essential and strategic support. Business essential work represents the majority of the work, about 60 to 70%, and it's necessary to do, but external customers don't really notice it. In HR, business essential work is payroll, benefits, generic training and development, legal compliance. In airlines, the pilots are the business essential work because they must do their job safely, but there's no additional advantage to an airline to have better pilots. And finally, strategic support work in the airlines might be when HR does work, for example, that selects the talent and develops the talent that for airline routers or flight attendants, or when we train and develop flight attendants and airline routers. And so strategic work leverages the advantage work. And so the positions in strategic support work, again, 20 to 25% of all work, if we're clear about what that advantage work is. So let's look at one more idea here before we start looking at people. And that's the idea that advantage work happens throughout the entire organization. And it's called by different names. Often we hear advantage work called A positions or critical jobs or wealth creating work. Whatever you call it, it's that 10 to 15% of the work that distinguishes the customers, the core competence of the company in terms of the key technical capabilities that drive advantage. A common mistake is to think of these positions as C-level positions. So it's the C-suite folks who create the wealth. And many of them actually do, but many C-level positions are more strategic support. They C-suite people, the COO isn't intended to do the advantage work. The COO or the CEO or the CFO leverages the advantage work and sponsors the advantage work rather than doing it. So think of the airline example. Flight crews and routers are not senior positions, but if done well, have the impact of reducing impacting the customer's positive experience of being with that airline. So, do you know what 10% of the work in your organization is that creates advantage in the eyes of your customers? Let me give you one more example before we move on to people. Let me think of another example of an advantage position was Home Depot. Home Depot grew faster than others in its industry for many industries. Home Depot is known for creating a customer experience for home handymen. So if I was building a fence or remodeling my house, I'd go to Home Depot, find someone to help me find all the right materials, and that person would usually give me some tips on how to do the project. So I was talking to a knowledgeable insider who not only knew how to do the project, but knew what I needed to buy at Home Depot to be able to do it successfully. So store managers were key advantage positions, and these store managers were responsible to select, develop, incent, and retain the store employees who would be passionate and knowledgeable about the home projects, so that when I went there with my home handyman project, I'd be able to find somebody there who'd be excited to help me. And at some point, Home Depot grew faster than it could select and train store managers who had the right knowledge, skills, and perspective to create that customer experience and culture in the store, so that it would be a different experience than if I went to one of their competitors. When that happened, when Home Depot started to hire store managers who did not create the customer experience, they were different than world class or best in class, they were just average store managers, they started to have store failures and ultimately had to slow and stop their growth in order to build talent. So these key positions, these advantage positions, are incredibly important because you can't grow faster than your ability to have advantage talent that delivers the right customer experience. So in summary, I've spent the last few minutes describing the first half of this positions by people matrix. The positions relate to the types of work. And in a moment, Erin's going to talk about people, but different work demands different skill sets and different types of position. HR adds the most value when it resources talent consistent with this type of work logic. So the advantage work requires people in positions who are best in class. So if I'm Home Depot, I need store managers who are best in class at creating a customer experience around home handyman projects. If I'm at Southwest Airlines, I want flight attendants who can make my customers laugh and have a good time. And so having Southwest flight attendants gives me advantage over Delta or American or United flight attendants because they're different and they create a unique type of customer experience. Strategic support work requires people who know the business and can leverage the advantage work. And business essential work requires people who can be accountable to drive optimal cost efficiencies with parity of quality and service. Well, having created this logic around positions are the different kinds of positions demand different types of work needs, which now drive a need to be able to identify the best fit for people who can do this different kind of work. So let me turn it over to Erin, who's going to talk about how to do that.
Thanks, Norm. So like Norm was saying, people are the other main piece of an integrated talent management strategy. Using talent strategically requires information about your talent pool, the technical skills, social skills, overall capabilities. Are they able to make good decisions? Do they treat people well? Those kinds of things. And the information that organizations collect about people tends to be different depending on the level in the organization or the place in the talent pyramid that the individual falls in. For example, in the C-suite, generally organizations are collecting information about current performance, specific skill competency gaps that affect that performance, and information that affects timing for succession and replacing, like retirement, those kinds of information. Looking at senior business leaders, information there is more likely to be relative to specific positions and career aspirations. Where could this individual be a successor to someone? What are the gaps in their current competencies or performance right now so that will become more relevant in another position or at another level, especially higher level in the organization? And how can we address those gaps? High potential information tends to focus on things like languages, mobility, gaps again at the current level. Are they struggling with delegation, relationship with peers, building teams, the kinds of things that need to be addressed to enable future advancement, as well as potential. How much runway does this individual have within the organization? How far could they possibly advance? And then finally, for all employees, most organizations collect information about current performance against goals and objectives. They also tend to collect information about technical skills. What are the technical capabilities we have, and where do they reside in the organization? And increasingly, we're seeing organizations also focusing on social skills and competencies at all levels in the organization. Not just what did people get done, but also how did they get that done. With that context, let's look at some best practices from the most recent round of the Top Companies for Leaders survey. There's two main themes that come out of this data that relate to assessing people as a way to collect information about existing talent. The first is that top companies are more strategic than other companies in their assessment practices. They're more likely to have a strategy that undergirds the use of their assessments, so they know why they're using it and what they're trying to get out of it, and to use them in a way that is explicitly aligned to the business strategy. So they know what business needs they're going to have and are assessing and collecting information about that. They also tend to be measuring the success of their assessment work, or the effectiveness of their assessment work, by looking at their ability to fill key positions and have the bench strength they need to deliver results. So they're using assessment explicitly to enable the business strategy and have the right people in the right places so that that strategy can come to life. The second theme that came out of the most recent round of Top Companies for Leaders is that top companies do more assessing than other companies. They use more 360 and competency-based assessments, they use more personality and leadership style assessments, and they use more cognitive assessments than other companies. So as you look at all types of assessments, they're using more assessments. They're also using those assessments more deeper into the organization. So they're much more likely to be, if you think back to that pyramid, to be looking at the high potentials down below senior mid-level leaders. They're also using assessments more broadly. Most of their people practices, external hiring, promotions, development, coaching, succession, talent review, all of those tend to involve elements of assessment. What's interesting is, in looking at the data on the succession and the talent review assessment use, is that there's not really as much differentiation between top companies and other companies around what assessments they're using and the extent to which they're using different assessments around in the succession planning talent review space. They still seem to be struggling with how to define first, and then second, assess potential. At RBL, we've identified 4 elements that define a robust view of potential. The first is achievement. Has an individual been able to deliver results? You don't want to move up someone or move into a new role someone who isn't able to get the job done right now. The second is ambition. Is this an individual that's been willing to move to get the experiences that will make them able to make good enterprise level decisions and build global perspectives? This is a major, major challenge for many of our clients. Do they seem eager to take on additional responsibility? Most new job assignments require new content areas and often moves that create challenges that challenge families and social ties. Is this an individual that's willing to put in that extra discretionary effort to be able to succeed in a new role? The third element of potential is agility. Do they have more balanced personality traits? Are they comfortable with change but don't have to change everything? Do they have the confidence to make the tough calls without needing to be the center of every decision or dominating every meeting? People with more flexibility in different situations tend to be able to succeed in a broader and more versatile array of positions and tend to be higher potential as a result. Finally, the fourth element is ability. This isn't just IQ, but also the propensity to think and learn from experience, to quickly identify possible scenarios and implications, and be comfortable in a more abstract decision space. Higher level positions come with fewer and fewer operating instructions. Higher potential individuals are those who are comfortable operating with a greater level of ambiguity. Obviously, if you think about these four elements, some of these elements are easier to measure than others. Which of the A's do you have the best data on? Are you most comfortable with the data you have in your organization? Which of the A's do you have the hardest time measuring, or the least level of confidence in the data that you have internally? Most commonly, what we hear are that achievement and ambition are the elements of potential that organizations have the most confidence in the data that they have. They feel like they're the easiest to measure, and they have the greatest degree of confidence in the data that they've been able to collect. While ability and agility seem to be the hardest, and where organizations are struggling with defining constructs for how to measure them. So with information on achievement, some on ambition, but very little on agility and ability, organizations are trying to do the best they can in identifying who their high potential individuals are in the organization. But it still remains a challenge. And recent research by the Corporate Executive Board that was looking at leadership transitions found that there's nearly 40% of internal job moves made by people identified by their companies as high potentials end in failure. So 40% of internal people identified as high potential make a job move and it ends in failure. And that fits what we hear from other clients. I think a story illustrates this. Recently, a client asked for us to look at 9 successful mid-level managers, all of whom had been identified as A talent in their internal talent review process. As we applied some of the constructs that we've been experimenting with, and we identified of those 9, 2 individuals who fit in what we would consider high potential. A high through their internal talent review process fit more accurately in a low or a specialized potential category, which it's important to note doesn't mean they wouldn't have potential to grow and continue to contribute within the organization, only that contribution and that advancement would be more narrowly defined and closer to their current areas of technical expertise. So assessments make more objective decisions about talent possible and can result in improved quality of talent. And that's why they're important as you think about people in the organization and gathering the data that you need in order to be able to make decisions about which people should be in which positions for the organization. So what are some of the ways that organizations are trying to solve this dilemma? I've talked briefly about one, but let's look at 3 additional case studies. The first is a global Fortune 50 manufacturing company. They had 2 to 3 vacancies coming up in their C-suite. There were several internal candidates that had track records of success, achievement, check, and were interested in the positions, ambition, check. But the organization didn't really have a history of assessment of people, and so had very little data on ability or agility. They asked us to run an executive leadership 360 with a full psychometric battery that includes some cognitive dimensions on a pool of people and give recommendations about potential and development needs to succeed at the executive level. The information from those reports helped confirm in some cases and challenge in others the decisions that the CHRO and the CEO were making, and was seen as important input into the decision-making process that they were engaged in. Getting the right people in the right positions is what enables business results. Second case study is from a regional financial services company with very low turnover and growing quickly. Needed to add another level of management into the organization, and was going to be looking primarily at external candidates, and so lacking some of the experiential data that organizations can gain about people as they work within the organizations. They were concerned about whether the new hires that they were talking to would be level ready. In other words, would they have the cognitive skills they needed to function at the level that they were going to be bringing them in at. We used our position fit process that includes a full psychometric battery and a proprietary resume analysis process to flag any agility issues for the positions in question and give a level of confidence that the mental models and capabilities that these candidates brought would be sufficient for the roles, or flag that they might not be. Again, the information in these reports challenged first impressions and that the hiring managers had. And in reviewing the results of these recommendations over the last 2 to 3 years, going back to the hiring managers asking, now that you've got this individual in place, how accurate were our assessments? Found a very high correlation between the findings in the report and what the hiring manager experienced when they had them on the job. Third and final case. An African conglomerate was trying to identify who should participate in a selective leadership development experience for potential future leaders. 200 leaders were in the pool, and they needed help narrowing that group down to the 50 that would be most likely to continue to succeed and add value over the course of their career with the organization. Using an abbreviated psychometric battery, we were able to provide information about which candidates would be most likely to have the longest potential runway within the organization. So what does all of this add up to? Matching key people to key positions requires an understanding of who a key person is. Who is your A talent, your most flexible, highest capability, fastest learners? And how do you get that information? You can get the clearest understanding of that by looking at the 4 A's: achievement, ambition, agility, and ability. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Norm, who will take us through best practices on how to bring positions and people together for an integrated talent management process.
Okay, thanks, Erin. This has been really helpful. We're looking at positions and people, and Erin's just done a brilliant job of laying out a logic for the 4 A's, which is a way to assess who your best people are and what the gaps are for the people who may not be your best people, your B's and your C's. Now we want to put it together, and this is where we look at both positions and people. We're going to provide some tools that will be useful to you in making this work. The different types of work doesn't mean that we want C people doing our business essential work or strategic support work. What we want are A and B people everywhere. But the A and B people in advantage, strategic support, and business essential work are going to be doing different things. So the assessment really is, how do we best match position and people? And remember that the advantage work is the one where you probably don't want anything other than your A people, right? You want your best people doing the advantage work. It's just too critical. This advantage work from a development perspective are also the accelerator jobs for these A people, because that's where they're going to learn the most about what really creates advantage for your company. Strategic support positions are about leveraging the advantage positions. So if you invest $1 in strategic support position, you should get $10 to $15 to $20 out of it. And then finally, business essential positions, your A and B players in business essential are accountable to drive costs down while maintaining service and, and industry quality parity. So a tool for doing this, the first tool we're going to look at is workforce planning. And there's 5 steps to aligning people in position. And we're going to look at doing this for advantage work first. The first step is to characterize the strategy. And by characterize, we're not talking here about identifying or proposing what the strategy should be. Your job here is to understand what it is. What's the intent of our strategy? And there's lots of models for doing this. Probably the simplest one is saying, are we a customer intimacy strategy? In other words, are we trying to sell more products and services to an existing set of customers, which we really understand better than the competitors? Product innovation, in which we're really focused on developing a suite of products and services that we push out to as many kinds of potential existing customers as possible. Or operations excellence, which is really a capacity strategy. How do we expand our operations excellence to expand capacity across both products and customers? So if you can characterize your strategy in that way, then the types of work and the positions and so on flows pretty easily. So again, characterize the strategy, identify the types of work, identify your positions, and here we're saying advantage positions, but it could also be business essential or strategic support. Then let's look at the players and assess people in the way that Erin was just describing. And then where there are gaps, how do we resource and develop them? Well, let's look at an actual example of a client in the supply chain services industry that actually differentiates itself by being a supply chain company for around hazardous materials. And what they tend to do in this company is set up shop with their clients, and then they handle the logistics of moving their hazardous materials to different locations. So in terms of characterize, here we're saying craft strategy, same thing. So in this case, the strategy is operational excellence. So what they're trying to do is to build the capacity in an operationally excellent way for their supply chain business. So the types of work in operational excellence for them, which they identified as advantage work, were one, sourcing opportunities, keeping their operations full and running, making sure that their operations were conforming to product standards and processes, and then shifting fixed to variable costs. So those are the typical kinds of things that an operational excellence manufacturing organization has to be able to do really well in order to be successful. So within that type of work, the question is, who does that advantage work in this supply chain company? Well, what they said was unit managers, which are the same as plant managers, might be a different language in your company if you do capacity or operational excellence. So unit managers or plant managers, the maintenance managers, and the hazardous waste leader. If those positions work together well, then they would do a great job of their advantage work. So the next question is, okay, which of the current players who are in those positions, how well are they doing? So using the same logic that Erin just took you through, we could identify some A, B, C criteria for those positions. And then so we've got a list of those positions, assess the people doing that work, and then what are the percentage of A, B, and C players in each position. Again, final step, resource and develop. So if we've got any C players, and I'd argue even B players in our advantage work, we should remove them. This is a place, advantage work is a place for A players in A positions. Get your B and your C players out of those A positions, get A players in A positions, and you're probably going to have some B players who have the potential to become A players and then move them into A positions when they become A players. But don't do that on the hope or on the hope that they'll do a good job while they're in those advantage positions. A players in A positions. Okay, so another tool. First one was the workforce planning ideas. The second one is really a pipeline audit. And we've done lots and lots of these pipeline audits over the last several years. And our logic in doing this is pretty simple. It's based on stages of development. And in the work of Gene Dalton and Paul Thompson, who actually had, if you're familiar with Ram Shriram's book called The Leadership Pipeline, it's the same type of logic that's used in the leadership pipeline that GE uses. But anyway, think of 4 stages of development. In the first stage, you've got people who are contributing dependently, people who are dependent on somebody else to tell them what to do. An individual contributor contributes independently in stage 2, and so they're a technical expert and responsible for a piece of work. People see them as experts. They've got an internal network very focused on their fairly narrow range of technical expertise. The next stage of development becomes contributing through others. So whether you become a manager or remain a technical person, you're starting to see the world in terms of not just your own work, but the work of others. So you manage, coach, you're an idea leader. You're able to expand your technical breadth and integrate other people's ideas. And you have both internal and external networks. So stage 1, you kind of have crappy technical skills. Stage 2, you have really good technical skills. Stage 3, you have your own technical skills plus the technical skills of the people that are on your team or that are working with you on the issue, the challenges. And then in stage 4, your breadth really increases to the whole business. So you're setting direction, you're using power rather than influence, you're sponsoring people, not mentoring them, and so on. So a pipeline audit is saying what we do is we work with companies. We'll say in this particular case they had, for whatever reason, there was 147 senior level leaders that we were looking at. And we asked for these 147 leaders, we basically asked the question, we described what I just described in terms of each of those 4 levels of contribution or stages of development, and asked more senior leaders where you would place which of those 4 levels of contribution most describe that leader. So they would just sort them into one of those 4 buckets. So the first question is, where should they be? If you're the top 147 leaders in a multi-billion-dollar company, should you be in one or two of those buckets? So the answer in our mind is if you're a top 147 leader in a multi-billion-dollar company, then you ought to be in stages 3 or 4 to execute the current strategy at a high level of performance. In this particular example, 67% of the leaders that were assessed were put in, not in the stages 3 and 4 where they should have been, but they were described as being in stages 1 or 2. So if you're a very senior level leader, which these people all were, and you're being described as being in stages 1 or 2, if you're in 2, you're probably competing with your people or ignoring them. And if you're in 1, that means you need somebody else to tell you what to do. Really important gap for them to know, because it's going to be impossible. The implication of this is it's impossible for them to deliver or execute their strategy given the profile of these leaders, because these leaders are not developing their talent in a way that will allow them to continue to grow. This profile is actually very similar to the profile of fast-growing organizations where they haven't been able to pay attention to talent development, and they've been just picking sort of warm bodies to go into leadership positions and finally get to this point where they're going to blow up because their people aren't being developed and can't execute the way they would want them to be. So the sort of the last thing that we did in this talent audit was to then have each of the leaders that had assessed and put these 147 people in one of those 4 buckets, before we told them what that meant, we then asked them to stack them, to stack rank them from who are your most critical, most valued players to your least valued players. And what you can see is the people who were in their stage 1 were typically their worst performers, seen as in the stack ranking very low. So they were in the 19th percentile. People who were individual contributors in their top 147 leaders were perceived as in their 45th percentile. People in stage 3, 69th percentile, and stage 4, 83rd percentile. So again, just as we had predicted earlier on, I'll go back to it, the expectation was for those leaders, they should have been in stages 3 and 4, and the ones that were actually almost in the 70th and the 83rd percentile. So again, showing that theory was actually pretty accurate. So let's, in our poll here, does your business planning process include workforce planning, the identification of advantage jobs and assessing those, or business essential strategic support jobs? And in your talent pipeline audits, do you have those, and do those identify what the aggregate pipeline needs are for your company? Well, with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Erin, who's going to talk about how we can fill the gaps.
Thanks, Norm. So once you've gone through the process to match people to positions in a way that maximizes the contribution of human capital in the organization, our clients tend to realize that they have some gaps. In the next few minutes, I'll quickly cover a few strategies for filling those gaps. Most managers and HR professionals are familiar with these talent strategies that we call the 6 Bs. Buying or hiring, building or developing, boosting or moving people to where they can contribute most successfully, borrowing or partnering with outside talent, or finding ways to leverage outside talent, and that's a growing area of interest and of importance. And I think Norm actually has a book that'll be coming out soon, so you can watch for that if you're on our mailing list. Bouncing or removing talent that doesn't fit or doesn't contribute, and then retaining, binding or retaining the employees that are most critical. The strategic work is to know how to create the right mix of these talent strategies to enable the business strategy. And I'll give you a couple of examples here using some companies that you're probably pretty familiar with. So Intel, looking to make a major transition into new products. They needed to quickly acquire, or need to quickly acquire, technical talent that they need to be successful in that transition. So they're going to need to go buy and borrow people that have those technical skills, while continuing to build and bind the top talent that they have in their traditional businesses. Procter & Gamble, needing to mostly stay the course, is going to continue to build and boost existing talent to fill its pipeline. Twitter, looking at fast growth, is going to have to boost existing talent and bind that talent to keep it away from its competitors while buying new talent to meet growth demands. So depending on what your business strategy is and your existing talent pool is, your talent portfolio will need to be adjusted in order to meet those business demands. At RBL, much of our work with client focuses on how to build. And we've found that with the right approach, with the right development experiences, that we can do a better job of bridging the gap and speeding development than has traditionally been thought. So while on-the-job learning from experience is still vital, there's no question about that, it can happen faster and more effectively with the right support. And there are things like coaching, learning experiences that integrate and help leaders apply what they've learned in the classroom that can really make a meaningful and measurable difference in your talent pipeline. One of the most common things that we use with clients, and Norm referred to this earlier, is an academy. And it contains a couple of different elements. The first is design, where it's customized to differentiate your talent in ways that your customers and stakeholders care about. We find that makes a major difference in the results that you get from a leadership or talent development experience. Second, assessment is another key component of an academy. It helps individuals identify what their specific needs are that they can focus on throughout this ongoing experience. It also can help inform the design and the emphasis and the focus of the content of the course based on the needs of the participants. Coaching has been hugely impactful with our clients, both in helping hold leaders accountable for making the changes that they have identified through the assessment, as well as in helping participants apply the tools and the models and the learning from the learning experiences into their day-to-day work experiences. We found that by spreading out the learning experiences over time with breaks between to experiment and go back and apply and come back and discuss, and by being recursive in the way that we teach throughout those sessions, and by reinforcing those messages at multiple touch points through time, that participants can take more away from these learning experiences than they do if they are going to sessions and turning around and coming back and don't revisit the things that they've learned. In addition, experiential activities can be identified that will help make things more effective. For example, customer experiences, geographical visits, task force, action learning, things that are customized to the individual's learning needs, and ideally will also help them to be ready for the places their next opportunities. So our proposition today has been that human capital can be deployed in ways that enable the people in your organization to grow and the business to grow. And organizations who do this better than their competitors win in the marketplace. So I know you're all asking, where do I start? And Norm can answer that question.
Great. Thanks, Erin. Well, we've talked about people, we've talked about positions, and we've talked about both positions and people. And you get the highest bang for the buck when you do both, right? But you could do something on either one of those and have some impact. And the RBL group, we've got tools and methodology. I'd love to help you with whatever those projects are. Continue the conversation with Erin and I if we can be of help. But we really have done a lot of this kind of work before, and would love to help you. So let's go through 5 or 6 ideas for the kinds of projects. This could be a call to action for you given the thoughts that you've had and things that are kind of coursing through your ideas through your head about what you could do to really make this more impactful. Well, first of all, you could figure out what your advantage work is and what the positions are for that advantage work. One of the things that was implied, but we didn't say explicitly, is that that type of work should be separated. People shouldn't have a mix of work in what they do. We should actually create positions that are aimed at having accountability to either drive advantage, strategic support, or business essential, because they're very different things, different outcomes. So what's the advantage work, and what are the implications for the positions in that advantage work? Another idea that we've talked about, how to integrate succession and business planning cycles. Third, how do we audit your assessment strategy to make sure you're measuring each of the A's, measuring ambition, agility, ability, and achievement. One that's not here but comes up when we start talking like this is the leadership pipeline audit or a talent pipeline audit of any group. How do you look at a group of folks, high potentials, C-suite, top 150, people in your doing the advantage work in your organization, the strategic work, and how do we determine what the aggregate development needs are? And we talked about an example of that in one of our clients. How do you assess strategic talent pool to know who and how to develop? Again, we gave an example earlier of this supply chain company that went through the process of assessing people in different kinds of work and what the development needs were, given the accountability for the type of work they had to do. And then finally, provide or improve coaching and development experiences when we identify gaps in our talent. Well, we've enjoyed talking to you about our ideas about positions and people, and really challenge you to go out and really invest some time and your best thinking and come up with some ideas and a plan for how you're going to apply these ideas to really have an impact in your organization. We can promise you if you'll do that, you'll really have an impact in terms of how HR is able to provide value, because the logic and the tools and the methodology that we've been describing to you are tools and methodology that really resonate with the business leaders of your organization. It's what they're trying to do. With that, I'll ask Erin to make any final comments. But for me, thanks so much for your time, and we hope you can successfully apply these ideas.
And I don't have much to add, but thank you for your time, and we'll be happy to answer any questions, or feel free to contact us and reach out to us. We're grateful for your time and hope that you've learned something and that it's been challenged you to think about the things that you do on a day-to-day basis in a new way.